Should we get
Let's
started?
do it. Let's get started.
Okay, perfect. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first Global Peralta Online Equity Conference. We are very much excited to see so many people registered for the conference. This morning, we were checking, it was 795, which was great. And it's also great to have this opportunity to share and discuss equitable practices with you for the next 3 days. I'm Didem Ekici. I'm the Distance Education Coordinator and an online equity trainer at Peralta Community College District. And I'm very excited to moderate this session with my colleague, Kevin Kelly.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Didem, and thank you all for joining us. I am Kevin Kelly. I teach online classes at San Francisco State University, just across the bay from Peralta Community College District. I consult with higher education campuses like the district and its colleges, and I just launched a book with Todd Zakrajek about online learning, equity, and universal design. Before we dive into today's topics, I'd like to review our agenda and establish a few participation guidelines, if I may. We'll start with a brief keynote from Dr. Siri Brown before asking our panelists to introduce practices and strategies for increasing learning equity for online students. And we'll reserve some of today's session, about 10 or 15 minutes, for Q&A with the panelists. Our goal is to have an interactive conversation focused on this topic with practical ideas and suggestions for your online teaching and for your institutions. So please pose your questions using the chat function. We'll moderate it and pass them on to the panelists. And toward the end of the hour, we'll also share how we can continue the conversation online, because we know some of our colleagues couldn't be here at this hour. We'll do it asynchronously on Padlet. So we'll share that link and some additional resources. Last but not least, we're using the automated Zoom captions during this live event, and we will edit the recording, the transcripts of the recording, before we share them to be more accurate. At the bottom of the Zoom window, you'll see a closed caption button. And if you don't see it, it'll be under the little more, the 3 dots. If you'd like to use the closed caption feature, just select that and then choose show subtitle and you'll be set.
And we'd like to get a sense of who is in the room today. So please use the chat box to introduce yourself and your institutions as the session continues.
We also want to let you know that we'll be asking for your feedback as our time comes to a close at the end of the hour. So hopefully you'll take a few minutes to share your thoughts and questions using the link that we put in the chat box so we can continue this conversation.
Okay, yes, we would love to keep in touch with you. So I'd like to welcome to our discussion today, Dr. Siri Brown, Vice Chancellor of Academic Affairs at Peralta Community College District. She will spend the next few minutes setting the stage for our conversation today. And Dr. Brown has been a great supporter and a true advocate of the Peralta Online Equity Initiative. Believing that advancing equity is crucial for student success, she's always provided support for the projects that focus on eliminating the barriers for students. Behind every successful project lies a great team and a great leader. We will listen to the members of this great team shortly in this panel. But first, I would like to introduce you to the champion of Peralta Online Equity Project, Vice Chancellor Siri Brown. Welcome, Dr. Brown.
Thank you, Didem. I appreciate it, and welcome to everyone to this amazing and powerful conference. I'm excited that you all have logged on and know that you're going to take back and share a number of critical tools towards achieving equity for online learners. And I really want to thank the sponsors who supported the conference, and especially to the faculty who initiated this work a few years ago and who continue to do this work. It's easy for me in my role to try to figure ways to support the work because it's obvious that there's a deep commitment amongst the faculty to transform the learning experience for our students, especially for our students of color. So I also appreciate being asked to give a few words to start us off because we all are striving for equity, diversity, equity, and inclusion. You hear people today talk about, equity, 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 And sometimes I think, oh, is this just becoming another popular phrase that people use? We used to say diversity and multiculturalism, and decades go by and the statistics don't change. Students of color are suffering and not getting the kind of support they need. Are people just throwing around this word equity, or are they really willing to do the work that it takes to transform the institutions of higher education and education overall? And I think that that's a really key piece to what's going to happen here in the next few days, because we can't just talk about equity. Equity is a verb. We've got to do equity. We've got to institutionalize the kinds of changes that are needed to support students, families, communities of color, and other marginalized populations. But the work is not easy. As a matter of fact, it's not easy at all. And one of the reasons that it's not easy is because the system of public education, including higher education and the community colleges, was built on a foundation of inequity. And I know that you're aware of this, but I'm not sure if we really reflect on how deeply ingrained racism is, inequity is, in the institutions of education. The founding of the education system in this country is just that. It was extremely exclusive to the poor, to women, to African Americans, to Latinx, to Asian Americans, to Native Americans, and more than just being exclusive, it was also damaging. So if we remember the history, we know that during the first few hundred years in this country's history, African Americans were held in bondage and were not allowed to learn how to read and write. We're not allowed to learn anything in terms of education. Now, we created our own means of sharing information and educating ourselves, even secret hidden schools out in the woods, but we were excluded from the system, because it was discovered very early that when you teach someone who is in bondage how to read and write, they will quickly fight back and they will quickly utilize that to liberate themselves. It's in the 1800s that we find the first schools for indigenous First Nation and Native American peoples. And those schools were designed to disrupt and destroy indigenous culture, so that children were ripped from families and put into these schools, these boarding schools, where they had to learn a better language and a better culture. And of course, that meant the English language and white American culture. And so they were used to systematically destroy Native American culture, or at least attempt to. Of course, they didn't completely destroy it, because resistance is always present. For Asian Americans, it's the same thing. Chinese immigrants were excluded from public education, and when they finally had access to it, they had to be in Chinese only schools. And so we find that this story evolves. And when the public education system formally arose in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and slavery had ended, then we find the rise of Jim Crow and the segregated, separate but never equal experience that, of course, everyone is hopefully familiar with. This is in a time when Carter G. Woodson wrote about how damaging the public education system was to the mental well-being of African American students, and you could apply that to any other marginalized groups. That he said that, in fact, the public education system was built as a system to support and sustain and maintain white supremacy, white superiority, and Black inferiority, and keeping Blacks relegated to the bottom. He wrote about this very clearly. He talked about the mental impact of what it's like to go through a public education system that tells you that he has done everything and you and your people have done nothing, and that impacts the self-esteem and the image and the trajectory of a community. Well, it's also during segregation that African Americans did have something that we don't have now, which is all Black schools taught by Black teachers that come from the community. And many of those schools were held in churches. And so there was an ethic and a love and a pedagogical practice that came from the cultural background of who we are. And we find that the graduation rates were higher than they are today for Black students. So there's something to say about who's teaching, how they're teaching, and what they're teaching, which is why we have this conference here today. Infusing equity into the pedagogy inside the classroom is difficult work. One, because the historical realities that the institutions were built on white patriarchal supremacy. Two, because the classroom space is considered to be protected space. You can't tell me what to do in this space. And well, while that's important and academic freedom is something that was fought for and must be protected, it makes it challenging to address institutionally the kinds of shifts that are needed in pedagogy, the kind of shifts that are needed in the treatment of students inside that protected space. It's also difficult to transform the classroom, the pedagogy, because it means we must address white privilege. And that's difficult to do in institutions that are predominantly peopled with faculty who are white. It means we must examine ourselves, examine the institution, and figure out how is it that we achieve equity when sometimes we are the ones getting in the way. So this work is important. I don't have to sit and tell you why it's important because you all logged on, signed up, and or presenting papers yourselves because you know how important it is. But it is more important than any other work that you may engage in. And the reason why is because of what Carter G. Woodson talked about. How is it that we are able to have the power to impact the mentality, the thinking, the worldview, and the trajectory of marginalized people? Teachers have tremendous power, tremendous power. If you sit and think about a teacher that influenced your life positively or negatively, you know how impactful teachers can be. And for my own experience, I've shared a story about a teacher in high school, Mr. Ledesma, who told me that I would never make it in college because it was time to apply and all the students were getting ready to apply. And he said, Siri, you'll never make it in college. And I didn't have the words to tell him, who are you to say this? But in my mind, I said that. I said, how are you to look at me and to judge where you think my future can be? But that experience wasn't negative to me in the sense that it stopped me. As a matter of fact, it was one of the experiences that propelled me as well. But so many African-American, Latinx, English second language learners, those who are in need of accessibility, those who learn differently, so many of our students have a story like that that they can tell, where the system, peopled by the teachers, were told, you just can't do it. This happens all the time, and it's damaging. But possibly more damaging than that is that if we are presenting our work with a pedagogical framework that is based on, white hegemony, quite frankly, then you're doing damage too. That's why this work is so important. And it's why the work that's come out of the faculty of the Peralta Community Colleges, the faculty who created the online equity rubric, it's the reason why that is so critical. I'm so proud to work in this institution where the faculty have yet again created an initiative that has now gotten not just statewide, not just nationwide, but even international attention. And the reason why it's so critical is because it comes from the faculty. If administrators sit up and try to say, you got to do this and you got to do that, it really doesn't work very well. People don't like to be told what to do from the top. It's more effective, it's more transformative when it comes from the teachers to the teachers, from the faculty to the faculty. And that's exactly what this online equity rubric is. And it's exactly what this conference is about, is faculty sharing with each other how we can enter the space of that exclusive space inside the classroom and push each other to transform what we do. The power that faculty have over the hundreds of students that you see every single year can be transformative if we're willing to do the work. Equity is a verb. It's the actions that are taken. And these next 3 days, we will be filled with all kinds of ideas, all kinds of thoughts about how to address equity in online teaching and learning, a space that, quite frankly, students of color and those in need of accessibility services don't do very well in. The digital divide, the learning styles, the challenges at home for many of our students. Online learning is not the space that we do the best in. But the work that you all are setting yourselves to can transform that. And we can see that the problem is not with the students of color, the problem is with the pedagogy and with the institutions, and we have the power to transform that. I hope you all take in everything that you can in these next 3 days. And I thank you for your commitment to equity, social justice. And if I can just end with this, I was so glad, like many of you, to hear guilty, guilty, guilty. So grateful, because those of us who are in the work of transforming institutions, institutional oppression, be it the police, be it education, be it healthcare, be it what have you, those of us who do that work, we know that these kinds of small but critical victories propel the rest of us to continue to do the work. I can't wait until we have achieved full equity in online learning. I can't wait until we say African-American students, Latinx students, disabled, so-called disabled students do just as well as everyone else in terms of success, retention, success, and persistence. So let's get busy, let's do the work, and thank you all for your attention and listening in for this conference. Didem, back to you.
Dr. Brown, thank you so much for this powerful conversation. I mean, it was so inspiring and so powerful. And thank you for reminding us the impact we have as educators on our students, right? Thank you. I know, right? It was so powerful. So now, okay, we need a break. Now we need a break. So we would like to welcome our panelists now. So it will be a great transition to from our Peralta Online Equity Champion to Peralta Online Equity Team. And we would like to welcome Corey Hollis, Inger Stark, Chelsea Cohen, Cheryl Davis, Douglas Cobb, Maria Guzman, and Amy Borges. Welcome to our panel. And when it's your turn, please introduce yourself. Peralta District's distance education plan outlines 2 values that guide the team's activities: the learners and equity. We want to start this session by playing a video of students describing what equity means to them. Hopefully, I will be able to share my screen. And yes, here we go. And please let me know if you are able to hear the sound.
I define equity simply as fairness. I think it's more of a getting an equal shot at success. I think in terms of students and academics, equity is enabling every student to succeed. So it could be giving resources to every student to get their stuff done, right? Not just equality, giving resources to everybody, but making sure that every single student succeeds and providing as necessary.
Equity, I kind of feel like it's something you need to be like in.
Didem, the sound went off.
and it's giving me an enriched atmosphere to have like my education reach its fulfillment and like the highest points I could when it comes to my schooling. So that's my kind of overview of what I think about equity. It's just kind of like my enrichment into what I need to be the best I can be.
For me, equity, the first word that comes to mind is being fair. And it's a different kind of fair. There are a lot of different ways people think of what is fair. Sometimes it's you give the same people the same thing, and that's being fair. But to me, it's a different kind of fair for equity. It's you give people enough so they have the same, ability to do something. Like, for example, let's talk about tickets. Let's say for a crime, a ticket is like $100. Equality, for example, means no one is discriminated against when given the ticket, and everyone has a fair chance of getting it. On the other hand, equity means the same thing, but instead of $100, you would say someone would get charged based off their income, and that's how much you pay for the ticket. That way, the ticket affects a poor person as much as a rich person. They're affected the same way, but while the equality with equality, they're charged the same.
Equity, in my opinion, like it is that everybody can get the chance to do something. Like no matter how their ages, their racial, their cultural, everybody gonna come there, and everybody gonna the same chance to do that, do anything in their something like.
I think equity is equality of outcome, whereas no one's equal on the way in. We all have different skills and techniques and benefits and whatnot, but at the end of it, so people that have, let's say, more financial services, they wouldn't necessarily need financial services, and people who have more thinking capabilities wouldn't necessarily need tutors and whatnot, but the people that are opposite of that would need that, so I think equality of outcome, meaning not everyone needs the same at the beginning, but everyone is going to need different things along the way to help keep them at the same level as everyone else.
Well, I would define equity as the possibility of all people to access whatever they might want to access.
Okay. Okay. So this was a video for the definition of equity from different perspectives from a few students. Hopefully, I wish we could just listen to them all, right? But like all of you, we're looking forward to learning with and from our experts. So let's get started. So panelists, welcome colleagues. Following that video featuring students, let's hear from Corey Hollis first, who is a former student trustee at Peralta. Corey, thank you for agreeing to start this conversation with the student perspective. So can you explain what inspired Peralta to create an online equity rubric?
Let's see. Well, thank you for inviting me to this conference. I guess to start as an introduction, yes, my name is Corey Hollis, and I was the former student trustee for Peralta District, and I worked with the Laney College, Associated Students of Laney College. And coming out of that, I was on my way to go to UC Berkeley, and I was picked up by the distance education department at Peralta District. So in essence, when I was coming into the program and to work on the online equity rubric, I was more so like involved as a student voice, because we were getting to that point where online learning is becoming more of trending up, so to speak. There was an increase in students being online, and there wasn't necessarily an increase in student achievement, especially with those who are in marginalized groups and disproportionately impacted by society and that nature. So for me, it was more so that this project was to make sure that when students were online and learning, that they get the same level of care that they would get in person in class. And not to mention that in class, in some ways, for disproportionately impacted persons, wasn't necessarily so connected. And then you take them away from the classroom and you further divide that. So there had to be some way that we can bring that connection together as best as we possibly can to at least get them to a point where they feel connected to the material that they're trying to learn and move up in their class achievement. So I guess in short, I don't know if I answered your question, but that's kind of where I started in the program, and we went to several conferences to advocate for that, and I was advocating for the student voice.
Excellent, Corey. Thank you. Thanks for sharing. And I'll turn to Inger. Hi, Inger. Do you have anything else to add?
I just wanted to do a time check. I noticed that we have so much to do. So I was going to give like a 3-minute overview so people who don't know what the rubric is actually know what it is. Is that appropriate?
Go for it.
Okay, so for those of you who don't know, we keep talking about a rubric, right? And the Peralta Community College District is a modest-sized community college district in Oakland, California. And about 4 years ago, we started tracking education gaps, equity gaps, not only between students who study face-to-face and students who study online, because the state at that point had been tracking that. But we began within this context that Siri is talking about, how do you create institutional change, to take account of our own impact on students of color, students from marginalized communities. So we started tracking data, this was before the state of California started doing this, about how the online environment impacts different student groups. And what we found was not good. And so what we did was, as a team, we decided to try to develop something that would help our institution change. Because as Siri points out, we continue to live in a cultural and historical context where institutions are very harmful to many students. We felt like there were lots of conversations about diversity and equity and pedagogy, but we would go away from those conversations and say, look at each other and say, what do we do now? And just so you know, Chelsea and I have been part of the distance ed team at the district and at the colleges for a number of years. So we brought together a team, a subgroup of people, which included some of our panelists, including Corey. And Corey, I must say, you're very humble. It was much more than just the student voice. You contributed immensely to our project. And we developed a rubric based on research. We didn't want to just do our own cool pedagogical ideas. We did research about what kind of academic studies have been done on what kinds of interventions happen in an online environment that best support students, all students, and then bring us closer to an equity of achievement in an online environment and try to level the playing field. So we developed the rubric, which has 8 criteria. We built it to be used in conjunction with an existing rubric at the state level. We all call it the OEI, CVC OEI rubric, but for the purposes of today, we'll just call it the state rubric and the Peralta Online Equity rubric, to be used in conjunction with that so that teachers would have something they could use when they're actually doing teaching design, when they're building their syllabus and learning activities, discussions, that those criteria, when teachers understand them and look at them and use them in designing online environment, teaching, would actually have an impact on the outcomes. So we've been at it almost 5 years now. The research was done 5 years ago. The rubric was developed a few years ago. And so I'm going to check in with you, Kevin and Didem, if that's a big enough picture. I just wanted to bring people in who may not be in the community college system, may not know what the rubric is. The link is there to learn more about it online. It has evolved over the years. And I think Chelsea would love to talk a little bit about how those criteria get implemented, right? Is that good?
That's a great segue.
All right. Hello, everybody. My name's Chelsea. And I'll just kind of piggyback off of what Inger was saying about the statewide rubric, which we love. It is a gold standard for course design. But one big difference between that rubric and our rubric, they're meant to be used together, but our rubric actually asks you to reflect deeply on your biases, on your pedagogy, on your teaching philosophy, and how you interact and engage your students. So it's a deeply transformative process. We've talked about a culture shift we see happening when faculty adopt it and go through this process of learning and unlearning. So I'll talk a little bit about the training that we built, which is a companion to the rubric. And it's seen many iterations, and this entire team here that you see today has collaborated to build it. It's currently got 4 modules. In each module, we examine 2 criteria of the rubric. And in the spirit of universal design, which is part of our rubric, it's got 3 sections: learn, analyze, and build. And so in the learn section, faculty are getting some background about the criteria, the research, specific strategies they can implement into their teaching. In the analyze section, they're then looking at a model activity in someone's course and assessing that activity using the rubric to develop some familiarity with it. And then in the build section, they're actually building something for their own course. So it's meant to be really practical, and you leave this training with 4 activities. There's a modified syllabus, icebreaker activity, some course content that you rework, and then an assignment. And those are meant to be plugged right into your class. However, as we've also talked about, it's not enough just to have a handful of activities that align with this rubric, right? This criteria really shapes our entire curriculum, and we want to see these principles woven in throughout our entire course. So then the next step after faculty complete this training is to work with a mentor to align their entire course. And we've got a checklist as well that faculty use to kind of just look through it, their whole course, work with a mentor to make sure they feel their entire course is aligned with this rubric. And so if you want to check out our current training, you can find it in the OEI or the Commons, Canvas Commons, and it's under Peralta Online Equity Training. And in that training also, it links to a library we've built, and the library has lots of different aligned and exemplary activities from all different disciplines, because we've had so many faculty take this training already. And I think that's about it.
Let me, can I add one thing, a couple things? So for those of you who aren't in the community college system and are thinking, how do I get a hold of this training? You can contact us. And if you have an LMS that's Canvas or even not, we can download the resource and send them to you as well. The other thing I want to say is Siri, thank you for saying things have to come from faculty. It does in the classroom. I also want to acknowledge that our team has always included staff, administrators, and students. So we really believe that all voices and perspectives are best when it comes to institutional change. And so we've included student voices as much as possible. The original rubric was designed also by staff. Your help desk staff will tell you everything you need to know about what students are not getting at your institution. We use the director of our help desk and our then Vice Chancellor, and as Siri said. So while we're talking with the rubric about how instructors can transform their pedagogy and teaching in an online environment, the bigger picture at our institution has been very inclusive.
Thank you so much. And I see that in the chat box, people are asking for the link for Canvas Commons as well. So whenever you have time, that would be great if you share it too.
It is in the chat.
Perfect.
And if people don't have access to that, they can contact us, Didem, right? You or Kevin, and how to, yeah, great.
Absolutely, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So Cheryl, Chelsea talked about the faculty perspective, and as a faculty member, before you became an equity team member, you were a faculty member who went through the training. So I'd like to bring you into the conversation, and after you introduce yourself, maybe you could share some strategies from the equity rubric and training that you used to address equity challenges in your classes.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Davis, and I teach nutrition at Merritt College. And when I first signed up to take the training, it became so much more than I thought it was going to be. And when we talk about equity, sometimes it's just box that we check off. Taking the training totally took away the box checking because I immersed myself in it. And I saw that, oh my gosh, I've been part of the problem. And so it was a very introspective journey for me. Admittedly, I cried through some of the videos. I I looked deep inside myself at my own biases. And then I began to say, it's time for me to make a change. If I want to see my students of color pass my class and be successful, I have to make some changes. And so after looking deep inside myself, I went through every single module, every single page, and held it up against the Peralta rubric and said, what can I do to change my classes? So it began as just one page at a time. And as I mentioned, I immersed myself fully into it. I looked at my syllabus, my assignments, my introductory module, and I revised everything. I changed the language, I changed the tone. I added images that reflected what my students looked like in my class. I included assignments that connected students to their cultures, changed the discussions to address topics such as unconscious bias, and revised the course grading to focus more on real life applications than the exams. So it was scary for me because I knew it was totally changing the view that I had of myself, but also the view that I wanted my students to have. And the very first time my course went live, I was scared. My heart was beating and I thought, what are they going to think? And I was overwhelmed with the response of my students. And at the end of the semester and throughout the semester, I received emails that said things like, I feel like you had my interest at heart the whole class. I had students who said, I feel so connected to my classmates. I feel connected to my community. And bottom line, what was so important for me is that my students said that they felt that I cared. And so my facilitators, as I went through the course, challenged me. You're going to hear from Doug Cobb a little bit later on. But at one point, he challenged me to videotape my bias statement. And that probably was the most uncomfortable thing for me to do. And it took hours for me to think about what I was going to say to my students. But in the end, after lots of tears and lots of different takes, I came up with something where students can see my transparency and they can see I am for real. I'm telling you what I want to change and how my class hopefully will change you in the process. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you, Cheryl. Thanks for sharing. And Maria, you're here too. You are the new coordinator for Peralta Online Equity Initiative. And can you please describe your experience completing the online equity training, then becoming an equity trainer?
Yeah, absolutely. This opportunity was brought to my attention by my dean at the time. We had worked together on a project before fairly closely. So I think she knew what my values were as an educator and what my concerns were. So she pointed me in the right direction. And previously I'd been involved with like open educational resources. So she knew that I was into supporting new initiatives that were about inclusive practices. And so I applied and I was asked to join and meet with the group. And I understood that it was a work group that it would be an ongoing initiative and I would learn more at the meetings. And looking back, it's hard to believe that it's only been a year and a half. The meetings they're not your usual meetings. We talk about everything from historical knowledge about the district that new members might not be, privy to. And I think that's a very inclusive gesture just on an institutional level. And so it can go from that to our astrological signs and how we like to work, and our senses of humor, our favorite things about teaching. We also, I think, over the past year and a half have kind of self-identified our strengths as educators. And I think it's always great when you have the opportunity to do that. And I think that it further demonstrates why we need to do that with students. And so from the beginning, our meetings were about finding out who the people at the table are. And I really think that that's a great, it's a great comparison to how we consider the online equity rubric and how that can manifest in a course environment. So yeah, over time, we've learned everything about like department needs, institutional needs, how to roll out the trainings. We've listened to the trainees' experiences and gotten to know them. We've made really thorough edits to our course design based on that feedback. And yeah, we've gotten to know more faculty across the district. And I know that that can be very hard, especially if you're primarily teaching online or if you're at a few different colleges. So that's been really important to me. I've been lucky to review other faculty courses. And for me, that's very invaluable free training, in my opinion, to learn how other people teach and how other people solve problems for their students. And so I guess the transformative part of this work, it's so much harder to put into words. But I will say that, I've been teaching for a long time. I've been teaching for about 10 years, 15 if you count my graduate study time. And I will say that it's kept me going during this past year when, a lot of people have felt really exhausted and burned out by the daily routine. And so, yeah, I think it's also reminded me to look back and consider my early educational mentors. Not just my negative experiences or my disappointments in early education, but who were my mentors and, how were they allies in the face of these larger inequities? So I think overall, I really respect that we share our leadership opportunities. So we kind of rotate them so that everyone has an opportunity to be a leader and to know what that feels like and not feel as if they aren't ready yet. And I feel like a lot of educators that are from like underrepresented or undersupported communities sometimes feel that way. So that was really special for me. And it's helped me have a sense of community that is stable, but also far reaching. And so I would say that it's been my favorite initiative that I've worked for. Thanks.
And Maria, before I'll let you go, I'll ask you to pick one or two rubric criterion and describe them in a way that would help novices understand their importance.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think the one that is probably at the top of my list is also at the top of the rubric list. It's technology. So I think that regarding technology, I would describe it as an area that symbolizes and also actualizes student access that we seek to provide. So one of the most common challenges for students is both having reliable equipment, but also, not just the Wi-Fi and not just the laptop, but also getting beyond the more symbolic, barrier, which is that working knowledge, am I smart enough? Am I born in the right generation to understand technology? And so the other part of that is super important. And even more interestingly, now that we're all online, I think we can all appreciate the strange situation of having to navigate technology education for students while navigating a learning management system like Canvas or Blackboard. That's hard, but it can be done. It can be done because there is no like either or. I think of technology as very much human. It's very much something that can utilize video, audio, in person. It can exist along with phone calls for support. It's not this thing in a vacuum that is only in the grasps of people in a certain social class or people who've been going, generations of college graduates. It's not that rare of a skill, and it can be taught. So how do we address that first part per the rubric? So the first part is, yes, we have laptop loans. Thankfully, we've got some awesome funding and we have Wi-Fi hotspots and we're doing the thing. But if students don't know about it and it's not in our syllabus or in our orientation module for everyone to see, then it's possible that some students could slip through like the cracks and not know about that and be struggling without having to be. And so we also have shared spaces that establish economic parity. We have public spaces that are doing this work too. And so we should showcase them as well and not feel separate from, but instead use all the resources that are out there, not just ours. And so I think that's one way to think about how to wrap your head around that category. So the part in the category that is like that transformative step, okay, is now that we're facing the barrier of technology, now that we're facing the mental block, now how do we use technology in ways that amplify student voices and foster an inclusive course community? So the example I would use is, yes, totally embrace your technological side and totally embrace learning how to use it and how to demonstrate it for students, but don't shut a student out if they just can't do it and if they don't want to. So finally, accept and embrace student experience in which a student cannot or chooses not to use technology. Keep your assignments flexible so that students can submit a Word document or maybe even like a TikTok video to answer the assignment. Imagine your assignments in ways that are not a hoop that they have to jump through in a very particular way. Imagine your assignments as things that they can do no matter what their circumstances are. So I think that kind of sums it up.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you. And I see great questions in the chat box. And we have two more panelists we would like to listen to. And then hopefully we will have time for Q&A at the very end. Thank you for your questions.
So Doug, you are both a teacher and a counselor, and it's so important to have both academic and student services perspectives. So would you talk about the impact of the rubric and the training, maybe based on your experience facilitating the online equity training or reviewing equity aligned courses? Can you provide some examples of addressing equity issues that you would like to highlight?
Yeah. I think just to dovetail off what's already been said, I think, one thing I noticed, and speaking from my perspective as an African-American, so often, I get caught up in the plight of Black and Brown, and I forget that there is a larger community that's still suffering from, being marginalized and the impact it has on them. And especially as a counselor, where you see all faces from all backgrounds, it's very important for me to remind myself, and in facilitating the courses, for me to remind others how important and how broad equity has to span. One of the things that I really see a lot of in as reviewing courses from other instructors and strategies that they discuss in the equity shell is the need for scaffolding. And I think there's been a large burden on instructors as they, I think Peralta has shifted away from a lot of basic skills classes. And with that, you have a range of students that are coming into the class with a lot of different skill sets. And I see, an overwhelming amount of support from instructors of accommodating that range, adding different models of scaffolding in their class to support student growth, encouraging supplemental education with tutorial to support student growth. And, when we think about equity, we also have to think about students coming in with the various skill sets and how we're going to support that. And we also have to remind the institutions that it's important that we support our basic skills students with the proper courses. And so that is one thing I see a lot of from instructors. Another thing, I want to read this passage because I found this passage very humbling. And I also found this passage from a Peralta instructor as a constant reminder of where we all need to be at when we think about equity. And, you know, like I said, for me, equity is most salient around race and ethnicity and culture. But the other side of it that we forget about is this side. And I'm just going to read this passage. Physical self-image is so complicated for many people, and it can add another layer of stress for POC. How many times have you seen an image that shows a diverse representation of race, but only shows people who are extremely fit and attractive and whom, even though they are POC, have very Western features, such as lighter skin, thin noses, and straight hair? Also, I seldom see people who have robust and large body shapes of people with physical disabilities, disfigurements, tissue trauma, and other anomalies. There are so many people out there who truly never see themselves represented in images. I have known a few people who rarely go out in public because of their physical appearance. My friend is a burn victim, and his face was extremely altered by the trauma. He goes out in public around once a month and will not socialize with me in public places unless he can sit somewhere, secluded. I used to try really hard to get him to come out in public with me. But when I observed firsthand how people react to him, I stopped pushing him. When he goes out, most people look away, many stare, and some look absolutely disgusted. And I felt that this passage is a reminder of, similar to what Siri said, of the power we have as educators. And so often we work on inclusion, but also so often we're the group pushing students away. And we're the group looking at students as if they're disfigured. And I think we have to remember what our roles are and how expansive we have to be with our outreach. So that is something you see kind of evolve with instructors as they go through the module. You know, you see a confidence of like, yeah, I've done a great job preparing my shell. I've done this, I've done that. Then towards the end, you see a sober humility they take on as they know they have so much more growth they can do as educators. And I think it's really fulfilling for me to be part of that. And it's an ongoing learning experience of how much improvement I need as a counselor, how much improvement I need as an instructor, and just how much how big of a role I can play in kind of spreading that outlook.
Wow, Doug, thank you so much for bringing that passage out for us, because I think it is a reminder that awareness is a key factor in how we can practice empathy and start using some of the equity strategies that we're hearing about. Amy, since we have about 5 minutes left, let's close out the panel with an easy question. A question that's on many people's minds anyways. What advice do you have about leading difficult conversations about equity issues with faculty peers?
Yeah, that's a great question, Kevin. So my name is Amy Borges. I'm part of the biology department at Laney College. I am privileged to be working with folks who are interested in it and weren't exactly sure how to address equity. In the sciences, we're often taught that the scientific method removes bias, but we all know that's not true. So it was good to kind of come from a place of that. I'm also lucky that our department runs by consensus structure. So we already have community agreements and we have codes of conduct. We use a talking piece in meetings. And so we're already trying to establish the example of what a non-hierarchical system would look like within our department. So within my department, we had already kind of started to have some of these conversations, and there's some folks from my department in the room, so I'm glad that they're here too. But again, in the sciences, often what I hear from other faculty is, I don't know how to do this for us. Like, how do we do it for us? And that barrier that we have of like the feelings versus the science part can sometimes be uncomfortable. And I think what Cheryl said in the beginning as well about doing the things that make you uncomfortable can be really helpful. I also have had a lot of conversations within our department about, there's an Adrian Rich quote that you need to acknowledge the location of your privilege. So where are we coming from when we come into the room, and how are we presenting these data about the sciences in ways that maybe are presenting it in a way that isn't inviting, isn't welcoming to other students. So we've had a lot of conversations about that. At Laney, we've also started a STEM equity group, which has been great. And we've had lots of conversations about different ways of grading or different ways to be more inclusive. Or again, some of us uncomfortably saying like, let's talk about our feelings, which sometimes can be hard for those of us who are very analytical that way. And I'll just say on Friday, I will have a panel about STEM if that's your area. But I think that it's also going to people in a way to ask them how they're feeling about stuff, as opposed to prescribing this is what you should do, right? So there's that aspect of it doesn't necessarily lead people into an open conversation where they feel welcome. So just kind of presenting it as ways like student success, you know, talking about ways that it can be more fun also, which is the other part. It's a little less dry this way, and trying to, again, meet people where they're at, and then helping to encourage them to try out new things. And sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. And as science people, we test and when we get results and we try again. So, you know, there is a lot of science to this in a way that is still comfortable and comforting.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you all panelists for this amazing discussion. And we do hope that this is just the start of the conversation. So in the chat, I just pasted the link to our Padlet board where we can have asynchronous conversations and sharing of ideas and resources. And as Amy mentioned, she's going to be doing a workshop this Friday. And so we hope that throughout all the sessions, we'll be able to keep asking these questions as we go.
And I was going to suggest, Kevin, can we extend the meeting like 5 more minutes, maybe to touch on a few questions only, or should we just keep everything for Padlet?
Well, I think for those who can stay beyond the hour, absolutely. We can keep the room open and answer some questions out loud. And in the meantime, maybe for those who are still here, we can thank our sponsors and tell people where to go next.
Yeah. Thank you. We thank our sponsors, CVC OEI, LI, Innovative Educators, and Stylus Publishing for their support. And I would like to thank our panelists for their time as well today. And we invite you to continue this conversation online, as Kevin mentioned. We will be back at 12 noon Pacific time. And please check the conference program for the Zoom link. And look forward to seeing you then. Please stay on here. If you have time, we're gonna answer a few questions. Thank you. So, do you want to start, Kevin, for the first?
Sure. So I know Chelsea and Inger answered this slightly in the chat, but Ingrid asked, how are faculty participants supported with stipends or reassigned time? Do either of you want to give a little more detail about how that's worked out?
Yeah, our initial team did this entirely on the time around their assigned. So the classified professional staff did, Kevin did, Corey even started with us initially in an unpaid role and position. So originally there wasn't. Now we've shifted to a model where with Vice Chancellor Brown's support, we have load for some people in some roles. So coordination, things like that. And then we use stipends to support faculty. As at our institution, stipends often work better for part-time faculty. Yes. Sorry, the garbage truck is out in the driveway. So we use stipends to support faculty both for running the training sometimes and for different semesters. We have different stipends for achieving different degrees of course alignment. We also we used the CVC OEI grant for the online pathways grant to support career and technical education faculty. And we're applying for other grants to be able to support faculty, staff, and students to stay connected. Is that about good? Mm-hmm.
Nice, thank you. And I know Amy started talking about the question that was asked in the chat. How has the experience been for math and science faculty applying various parts of the rubric? And again, she's going to tackle that in more detail on Friday in a workshop. Are there any other questions out in the room while we have some of the panelists still here? Love to hear your thoughts or your questions. Pop them in the chat. And while we wait for those questions, Didem, maybe you can just share your own thoughts as the new distance education coordinator for the district, and how the traditional tasks that you perform, like running committee meetings, has allowed you to weave in some of this equity work.
Oh, actually, I can say that equity is the fun part of my job. It's like, I don't feel like it's extra work or it's something I have to do. It's like whenever we have equity meetings, it's like, oh, that's great. I'm going to see my colleagues, my friends. So that's how I feel all the time. So because we have a great community, and what we try to do during the trainings is to continue this community with other faculty members. Because when I was facilitating online equity training, one thing I realized, teachers or our colleagues feel safe to share whatever they feel about like some issues, right? So that is great, because not everyone feel comfortable sharing some issues, what's going on in their classrooms and how they can bring or solve these issues. So I think what makes this online equity team and training unique is giving faculty an opportunity to share ideas and, like, provide solutions and discuss and brainstorm on some issues. So that's what I love about online equity initiative and team. Yeah. And I'm looking at the chat box. I feel like we don't have any more questions, right? But if any questions come up later on, please feel free to use our Padlet. And we would love to keep in touch with you all. Thank you for joining today's session. And we'll see you at 12 Pacific time.
12 noon Pacific. Yep.